I think when you look at kiosks, right? Kiosks have been a big technology investment over the last year or two. And that has been a huge level of support to the front of house element, the way in which cashiers are engaging with the consumer. What's been most important to me is that you still have the opportunity that if a guest comes into a restaurant and wants to be able to order from someone else, an actual human, they can still do it. But for the guest that wants convenience and wants just to engage with a kiosk, tablet, or whatever it actually is, they've got that opportunity to do it. And so I think it's about providing more choice. It's still embracing convenience. But again, it's just a natural evolution of how do we run our restaurants in a more productive fashion.
Welcome back to the Prosper Brief. My name is James Rogers, Chief Operating Officer of Prosper Company. Today, we're diving into one of the most urgent and misunderstood topics in our industry, artificial intelligence in restaurants and hospitality. We're not talking about sci-fi scenarios. We're discussing the real decisions operators are facing today. How do we use AI without losing the human touch? What do our teams need from us to feel empowered, not replaced? And how do we make smart choices without overcomplicating it all? To help us navigate this conversation, we're welcoming and joined by two of the most forward-thinking voices on this topic. Carl Orsbourn, who is the SVP GTM Enterprise for Invisible Technologies and co-author of Delivering the Digital Restaurant. Carl is a restaurant tech leader with deep expertise in the digital guest journey. And also Scott Klososky, a technology futurist and founding partner of Future Point of View. He's also founder and CEO of Industry Defenders, roles in which Scott advises leaders on how to stay human while embracing what's next. Let's get into it.
Attention emerging leaders in food service and hospitality. Are you ready to accelerate your career? If so, join us for the Accelerate Conference on October 22nd through the 24th at the Omni Hotel in Dallas, Texas. Gain insights from over 1,000 collective years of business and leadership experience. Engage in more than 30 focused breakout sessions. Be inspired by 5 empowering general sessions featuring industry experts. Don't miss this opportunity to build valuable connections and elevate your leadership talent to give your business the competitive edge it deserves. Register today at prosperaccelerate.com.
To get things started, I just want to throw out, I was thinking this morning, I was driving my daughter to something and I was thinking, what could I say about artificial intelligence that would sum it up? And I think that the best way to get started is to say, when it comes to artificial intelligence, there's really three types of people. The first is the person that has their head in the sand, right? Either ignoring or not, maybe they're completely naive to what's coming, right? The second is the person that hopes, that this doesn't turn into the T-1000 or 1984 scenario, right? Maybe a little bit of fear and anxiety there. Or that third person who's quietly and intentionally dollar cost averaging into NVIDIA. So, I think that, you've probably fall into one of those three camps, or maybe some of each of those. Before we get started on really delving into how we approach that in the food service and hospitality industry, maybe a quick word on, Carl, maybe start with you. What should we know about you before we dive into the topic?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on the show. First of all, it's great to be here and to have an important conversation. I've spent most of my career in retail. I used to run a 1,000-unit convenience store chain. But over the last 7 or 8 years, I've been more on the kind of intersection of restaurant technology and just really a lot of the things that have been changing in our space. I've written a couple of best-selling books, most notably Delivering the Digital Restaurant, which came out at perfect timing, literally when every restaurant became a ghost kitchen and had to embrace off-premise food delivery. I'd spent a few years in the ghost kitchen environment, and we wrote the book to help restaurants really understand why they had to embrace e-commerce. And then, of course, the pandemic really drove a lot of that forward, and a lot of adoption had to happen very quickly as a result of it. And the book was really important for a lot of folks who just didn't know where to start. And of course, over recent years, I think folks have started to realize it's a marathon, not a sprint, and their tech stacks are getting ever more complex and convoluted. And now we're talking about AI. And in many ways, it's a real seminal moment. We're at the point of the precipice once again, where a lot of restaurant chains are saying, is this something we need to take seriously? And I think increasingly we're finding that folks are saying yes to that. And so today I work at a company called Invisible Technologies, and we're helping organizations figure out how to solve those most complex problems using AI, and building on our experience with helping a lot of the key models out there that have been really driving this change over these last few years. And so it's a fun journey, quite honestly, because for me, I get to help executives solve a lot of these challenges and try and figure out their pathway through it, whilst also riding this wave of huge change. I mean, this space is changing every single week right now. And so it's tough for me just to keep up with a lot of the change. But I'm excited for today's conversation, and looking forward to getting into some of your questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Scott, what would you say? What should we know about you before we get going?
I've been in technology for over 40 years. It's all I've ever done. I spent much of that time building and selling software companies. Been very successful with that. Always my profile has been looking over the horizon and being good at predicting where technology is going to go. And I feel very blessed that the AI wave came about. I think the technology is absolutely magical. And for a technology person to have this inventory of tools and to really be thinking about where is it going to go and what will it look like when it's done is just unbelievable. I mean, I'm having so much fun in the middle of this technology wave. So, I think the most important thing for people to know, I spend my days advising leaders and companies on AI strategy and how to operationalize it, and then painting pictures of where it will end up so that they know how to build a strategy and what the destination is. And so that's probably the most anybody needs to know. Well, I'm sure they'll learn a lot more about Carl and I when we start answering all the questions.
Very good. Yeah, and Scott, just a little point of reference for you. I watched a video last night in prep for this of you talking about, where things are going, and I got about three-fourths through the 20 minutes or however long it was, and it sounded so relevant to today's topic and today where we're at, but it was 6 years ago, and I thought, man, that aged really well, and you were very well, you were very right. So. Uh,
Yeah, well, the crazy thing about that is if you ask me the questions about where is AI going, I think I can give you a very accurate picture of what it will look like in the next 6 years.
Well, let's dive into that. And so, let's start right there because, to know where we're going, we have to figure out where we are right now. So, back to you, Carl. I'll just say, big picture, where are we at right now, specifically in the restaurant industry, the hospitality industry? What's possible? What are operators doing? What's not sci-fi right now?
Yeah, I asked this question. I was moderating a panel at a conference last month, and we had some big brands there, and we had AWS, and their answer to the like a scale of 1 to 5 was the restaurant industry is probably on either step 2 or step 3. So we're out of the gates, but we're on those first few laps, is the way I'd frame it. Some brands have dabbled with chatbots, predictive ordering, but the real transformation hasn't really hit yet. Clearly most of the emphasis in the last year or two has been very much on voice AI and the growth of pickup through the drive-through lanes. We've seen a huge amount of surge in that particular area. And that's certainly driven a lot of wins, I think, for those organizations that have drive-through as a key kind of category for them. I think the companies that are winning are not necessarily the ones with the flashiest AI pilots. They're really the ones that are quietly embedding intelligence into their day-to-day operations, whether that be training, scheduling, forecasting. Invisible ourselves, we're trying to help organizations do that by just helping AI be part of the system, not a side experiment. I was thrilled to hear from Shiv Adiappan, who's one of the VPs of technology at Yum recently. And he was talking about the journey with Byte and the fact they've been on this journey for 5 years of creating this proprietary tech stack that is helping them be able to truly yield all the benefits of how, when collating the data together, they're going to be able to harness a whole load of capabilities across the organization, perhaps in ways that they've yet to truly realize. In fact, at Restaurant Leadership Conference, they were talking about this idea of a smart GM and the way in which AI is going to evolve based on all of this work they've done up to this point to be able to take a series of data points from all over the restaurant environment to be able to help GMs make better decisions. So that is a very exciting future. But if Yum started this journey 5 years ago, and it's still, that hasn't been put into place, by the way, that's something they're on a journey towards doing. It tells you, I think, that probably the average restaurant out there is still at what we call invisible, at the edge of the chasm, this place between the excitement and the furor associated to what's happening with AI, but then also the challenge, right? 85% of AI projects fail, according to Gartner. So they don't even get out of the gates. And that therefore is telling you that a lot of organizations are struggling to be clear on what is it that they're really trying to go after. What is it in terms of their data that they need to fix before they start embarking on this particular journey? And how exactly are they trying to work on the things that are going to make the most sense for their business, being really clear on those outcomes at the outset. And I'm sure Scott will agree, if you don't have those things in place, you're likely setting yourself up to failure, which is why those stats are as stark as they are. So I think we're at the early stages, but there's a lot of excitement, and I think a lot of people are keen to get on the train.
Yeah. I've had a chance to hear from a couple of different technology companies, one that's listening in stores and one that is measuring quantities of meat in a pan. And it seems like there's these roll up technologies that, when going back to your GM comment, like that maybe, the what can be coalesced and brought together and giving a GM a dashboard of information that would not be possible. It's just, how do you do it, right? And how do we get to that scaling where it all gets rolled up into some larger AI brain that really can bring those things together, right? Which is probably the hardest part, right?
Totally.
Scott, let's zoom out a little bit. The broader economy, multi-industry perspective. Where are we at? Are other industries ahead of us? Or are we ahead of other industries? What do you see?
Well, I think the restaurant and hospitality space, as Carl said, jumped out pretty early with trying to use AI tools as a customer interface. And in some cases worked okay, in some cases was a failure. Instead of really looking at maybe restaurant and hospitality as ahead, behind, let me say it this way. I think, first of all, we have a definition problem of AI. So we say that term, but that term means many different types of tools today. So if I break down into three and I say, okay, well, there's embedded AI. So there's Copilot, Gemini, right? There's Agent Force at Salesforce. So there are AI tools that are embedded inside of other tools. Then there are agents, or there are AI tools that can do work on our behalf. Then there are knowledge tools. So AI tools that hold knowledge, distribute knowledge. Well, those are three very different uses of this thing we call AI. Well, now, if we look at restaurant and hospitality compared to other industries typically have tried to use AI technologies that are back office. So they've started back office before they ever go customer facing. And I find that interesting, right? That there's a real difference between restaurant and hospitality and manufacturers or banks or insurance companies, because they've all started with back office automations and AI analytics. And so if you think about those three, right, different technologies, I think there's a huge opportunity for restaurants and hospitality to say, all right, how can we use embedded AI right? What does that mean to us? How can we build knowledge tools? What could that do for us? And then when we look at agents, be a little discerning about agents that are customer facing versus agents that are back office, right, or operational. So that would be my view. I just, if you're going to pin me down, I would say no. I think the restaurant industry is behind some of the ones we work with, but it's a more sophisticated answer than that because you have to say behind with what, right? With what kind of AI tools?
Yeah. And also, selling insurance products or doing things that revolve a kind of an assembly line process in a factory are different than serving food to people. There's a whole different dynamic so yeah, I think it makes sense that we might be a little bit behind, and we're going to get into some of that with the human type of element to it. But any either one of you, any myths or misconceptions that are currently prevalent within this conversation around artificial intelligence? I know you already kind of talked about how there's different types of tools what else is there that people don't fully realize, or any
Uh,
myths that we need to debunk here?
I think the main one is that it's all about robots replacing humans, right? That's the one I come up against the most, and I think for me, it's more about treating AI as an assistant to the team as opposed to a replacement, at least today. And I think all you need to do is look back in time a little bit, right? So I don't know about you, but when I grew up in my household, we didn't have a dishwasher, right? Now, you tell me about a restaurant today that doesn't have a human dishwashing machine or an actual dishwashing machine. Most restaurants are going to have a machine, right? They're going to have them to support. There's still some element of a dishwasher role involved in most of the back of house kitchens. So I think there's something here about just understanding that there is a way in which the capabilities that AI is bringing to the table is going to assist the humans, especially with tasks that perhaps the humans don't always want to be involved in themselves. So I think when you look at kiosks, right? Kiosks have been a big technology investment over the last year or two. And that has been a huge level of support to the front of house element, the way in which a cashiers are engaging with the consumer. What's been most important to me is that you still have the opportunity that if a guest comes into a restaurant and wants to be able to order from someone else, an actual human, they can still do it. But for the guest that wants convenience and wants just to engage with a kiosk, tablet, or whatever it actually is, they've got that opportunity to do it. And so I think it's about providing more choice. It's still embracing convenience. But again, it's just a natural evolution of how do we run our restaurants in a more productive fashion, especially given the fact they're so tight when it comes to a margin perspective. We need to save every single penny in these restaurants, especially in an environment right now where value is becoming increasingly critical. And I think that's the last thing I'd mention is Harvard, I think, said this. I think it was Harvard Business Review. And they said it's not about humans being replaced by AI, but more about humans with AI replacing humans without it. And I would say the restaurants that have a dishwasher are probably more profitable, are probably more productive, and are probably better because they're putting their people in front of their guests more, as opposed to those that perhaps don't have it because they've got humans in the back washing those dishes.
I'll give a few more, and then I agree with Carl. But I want to add on or pile on to Carl. Uh, the theory that an AI is going to decide that humans don't have value and try to kill us, is a movie trope, but there are still people that believe and ask me if that's going to happen. There is a belief that AI is hard to learn, and that's crazy. It is absolutely not hard to learn how to use it. There's a belief by some leaders that it's expensive. It's not expensive, right? So there, there are a number of things I think that are misconceptions. Uh, I'm fascinated by it's going to replace humans. If I do just look in the restaurant space, uh, we already have restaurants that are trying to build robots that cook the food, right? I mean, we've got a lot of automation going on in the industry, but in the real world, what will happen is there will be a curve, and at one end of the curve will be restaurants that try to highly automate and take humans out of it, lower their prices. Everything's mechanistic. That will serve a narrow group of people or customers. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have farm to table, all human. That one will serve a certain group of customers. And there'll be a lot in between. But if you look at it on total, I don't think you're going to see a massive drain of people working in the space. That's different than bus drivers or truck drivers, right? And there are other industries where we will see over the next decade or two a lot of jobs that change. We won't need drivers anymore, but we will have to have more people to support driverless vehicles. I think it's too many times in this world that we call AI, people are trying to make very black and white statements. And that isn't usually how the world works. We're usually going to get a curve with many shades of gray. And I'm much more optimistic.
New roles will emerge. I think that's the thing, right? You think about the way in which so just take the idea of a delivery truck, a US Foods or a Cisco's delivery truck coming to a restaurant. Now, I understand why Scott's saying that there might not be a driver to that. But today, the driver also is responsible for unloading a lot of that and then bringing that into the restaurant. Well, guess what? Where does that job get done? Well, now maybe we actually have to think about those individuals being employed at the restaurant, right? So you have to find roles and adapt, much like we don't have secretaries in our offices anymore and they're not writing on typewriters. Well, we adapted, but we still have EAs, we still have chiefs of staff, right? So there are certain elements of roles that move into something different. And I think we'll find the same in this industry.
Agreed.
Yeah, like what is the CEO of Anduril just wrote that op-ed about, the white collar apocalypse or whatever, that a lot of jobs would be taken. And he has hey, let's tax these companies that are benefiting from that to be able to provide some universal basic income. And so there is a lot of like conversation around there. So I understand why people have that level of fear and friction, but just like any technology, it used to be that people shoveled and picked quarries, and now we have all this pneumatic technology. So to your point earlier, Carlo, that, dishwashers replaced a portion of a job, right? And will continue to do so. And also, you can order from your phone if you go to Starbucks, and that replaces a portion of a job. You're not having that person standing at the register, there the whole time. And so now they're free to do other things, right? The question is how much of the other things will get, not rehired for, right? And that goes back into other industries, that there will be industries that are affected more than others. And um, I also offer this. I think that it's actually our differentiated value in terms of that argument that we are a human business, right? There's a little bit of novelty in going to the burger joint in California that has the flippy that flips and you order at the kiosk. There's only one employee. There's novelty to that. But if I'm honest, if I'm taking my mom out for, Sunday dinner, we're going to a place where there's humans, right? And the other thing I was thinking about with that topic in mind is it's the value of the fact that memory is limited, that when somebody remembers my name at a coffee shop, if I'm going like the Cheers effect, right? That's the value, that you can't remember everybody's name, but you do remember mine. So, there's something in that je ne sais quoi of restaurants that we can't lose. But I think that gives us confidence, right?
It's a human business. The hospitality business is a human business. And it's ironic, is it not, that for an industry such as ours to be such a human business, that it also has some shocking statistics attributed to the tenure of the employees in our industry. Humans are burning out, right? I don't have the stats to hand, but even since the pandemic, the numbers are still pretty shocking as to how long someone will stay in a role. And I would say if we were to bring on an operational leader of one of the chains that we work with at Prosper, I bet they would tell me that their best performing stores typically are the ones with the best store leadership, the lowest turnover rate, and the highest customer satisfaction. So if you create the right experience for your team, if you have the right standards in place for your business and your customers love it, then that is the type of restaurant that's going to win in this industry. And so if AI isn't here to replace the server or the chef, and it's actually here to reduce the drag on their day, and therefore it's been seen more as a co-pilot to be able to support the leader in that restaurant to spend more time training their team, to spend more time in front of their guests to make sure they have a better experience, then when framing it like this, I think we're going to get to a much better place where suddenly we actually become an even more human-orientated business. So that's the hope I have.
Let me support that. We get asked at our firm to do the financial analysis on AI. And the assumption is we're going to show up and say, put in AI and you can get rid of this many people. And that isn't how we do the analysis. So we do it based on hour capture. So we go in and we study how many hours can we capture. Okay. And so maybe we say at a restaurant, we can capture back 1,000 hours, right, across these different jobs. Now you have three choices. One choice with the hours is you could shrink your staff. Another choice is you could grow without adding more people and just upskill. The third choice is where a lot of organizations are going, which is, or you could do everything faster with higher quality and spend much more time with your customers, much more time with human contact. So every time we work with a leader and we explain that hour capture and then say, now you can reinvest these hours, make your choice. It's a strategic choice. Rarely are the leaders saying, well, let's get rid of people. They're choosing door number 2 or door number 3. So I have to answer the question for employees a lot. Should we be scared? And I agree. I say the same thing. You should be scared if you choose not to use these tools. If you're not going to amplify your skills, well, then you might want to be scared. But if you're good with using machine intelligence, robotics, using synthetic intelligence, AI, then you have no issue upskilling, amplifying, and playing a role that we need. But I really like getting people to quit thinking about implement AI and get rid of people and think implement AI, capture hours, reinvest hours.
Yeah. It's I remember I worked at Starbucks for about 6 years, and I remember there was never enough time. You had to do the ordering, you had to make sure the scheduling was done, you had to make sure that the dust bunnies were cleared off the shelves with the retail products. And it just felt like you're always chasing your tail. And so I think that on some level, there's going to be different types of them, but yeah, especially in retail or in food service, the idea that we're just going to like, oh, okay, I don't need those hours anymore. Maybe the company will save some, but I really hope that the idea is I can be more present for the customer. That's the hard part. You felt like you had to shortchange the customer for the audit task to make sure you were compliant, right? So yeah, it's a big opening thought, right? That AI is not coming for jobs, at least not all jobs, right? But in our industry, hopefully we'll use those hours to do more productive tasks and to make our store environments better. Um, what's a smart, thoughtful way that leaders can bring this discussion in without causing resistance? How can they get over that? With their teams and with maybe even at a store level. What would you guys recommend, Carl? What do you think?
I think the best way I've seen it represented so far is humanizing it. I think Bojangles, they actually call their drive-through AI Bolinda, right? So it has a name, just like any other team member. And I think that certainly helps drive the adoption of change. And if you start with AI by demonstrating where it helps the team, not necessarily where it monitors them. For example, you could imagine a use case where AI predicts no-shows so that you've then got an ability for your host to manage the floor better. That's a win for everyone, right? If you frame it as a productivity tool, not a surveillance one, if your employees feel that it's making their lives easier, if they can enjoy their role more, adoption takes care of itself.
I'll go a little different direction. I agree with that. Uh, I think I've observed it's really important to paint a vision that leaders must be able to tell people, here's what the end looks like, right? Here's a vision of what we will look like when AI and machine intelligence is fully exhibited. And when you can paint a vision like that, then it will inspire people and it will take away some of the fear. And so I'm dealing with this every day of how do you move an employee base, whether that's 5 people or 500 people. And you move the employee base by setting a vision that's very inspiring for them. And leaders are struggling with that right now because most of them don't have a clear picture of what is this going to look like when we're done. And the leaders who can paint that picture, they build excitement. They don't have to worry about change management, right? Their team comes along.
You, Scott, have a term you've coined, and I think you've trademarked it, right? Is it, how do you say it? Humology?
Yeah,
How
humology.
does, how does that interplay with what we're talking about here? The balance between people and technology.
So we developed that about 13 years ago, and it's a scale. It goes H 1 2 3 4 5, T 1 2 3 4 5, and that denotes how much human versus how much technology is used in a process. So it's a humology scale. Uh, we developed that because we saw the problem where people were saying something was either automated or not automated. Well, almost nothing is fully automated or not automated. So with the humology scale, we began to have a conversation about how much human is needed in this situation versus how much technology is needed. And H is not bad and T is not good. Let's just find what the right balance is for our business plan, right? If you're a farm to table, you can be an H3, right? But if you're going to be a cheeky, fast food that you want some glitz and glamour, maybe you want to be a T2, right? So that's how the humology scale works. So we use it in a restaurant or any business to look at their processes and say, what are your top 10 processes? And what percentage of human versus technology should be involved in that process, like dishwashing. Well, if you look through a whole restaurant with that lens, it becomes a strategic decision, right? What is our brand? What kind of feel are we trying to create? How efficient are we trying to be? What are we trying to do around quality? And so that's the concept. But in the AI era, humology's taken on a whole different thing about in an organization in total, where do we want to be on the scale? And so it's just a vocabulary where we can talk to leaders about, all right, how much technology is appropriate or not. So I'll give you an example. Uh, Banks, we work with a lot of banks. Banks are struggling with how much human touch, how much do we keep versus how much do we automate? Do we shut down, all of our locations, right? Do everything online. We do all our lending over the website. So we will use the humology scale to work with the board and work with the leadership team to say, all right, well, where is the proper place for your brand on the scale? And now let's work to that. And interestingly, I had a board meeting with a bank not too long ago. Went around the room. I asked all the board members, where are we today? Where do you think we need to be in 5 years? 20 board members, almost none of them said the same thing. I said, so do you see the problem? Like we're moving into a automation era where there's a lot that's possible. You all can't even agree on what the feel, right? What the brand of this bank is going to be. And that's a problem.
That's a cultural dilemma, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, certainly.
I see similar challenges. Again, if you strip this back to what ultimately makes the AI work best, it comes back to the data. And the average restaurant group has somewhere between 16 and 25 different pieces of technology, each run by perhaps different teams, different leaders at different times, some which are like hardwired into the business now. And many of them are disparate forms of data coming out of those systems. Where there are APIs, they're binary between one system and another. And I think this is the challenge, right? Because ultimately, to make the best decisions, if you look at AI ultimately as a support mechanism to make better decisions for the business, whether it be at the boardrooms that Scott was just referring to or at the GM level that I was referring to before, ultimately it's about helping making better decisions. And I use the example in my second book, The Path to Digital Maturity, where I explained, today, imagine you have a situation where two line cooks call out. Well, today the GM has to hustle. They have to figure out what are we going to do to maintain service when that kind of thing happens. And yes, there might be some form of interface that kind of works between the HR payroll system and the scheduling system. But what if we had a world where AI was able to be able to actually either predict that this would happen in the first place, or secondly, maybe even get to a place where it can help the GM make the best decision, knowing that maybe at the location 2 miles down the road, there's someone that actually wants extra hours. Maybe it's about registering on OpenTable less tables for reservations this evening, or increasing prices on DoorDash so that way you can automatically throttle some orders to reduce the throughput capacity, knowing that your throughput is going to be impacted if you can't replace those line cooks. Now, that type of thing today can't exist because these systems aren't holistically interdependent of each other. And so, therefore, if we can build a world where the data comes together, and that requires, therefore, the decision makers at the top level to be able to say, do we want to be able to have this level of decision co-independence between our systems to be able to drive better outcomes? If they can get to that place, then they can agree about having the right data architecture, the right data platform, which is something that we do at Invisible Technologies. But if they can get to that place, then they're going to get to a better place where they can then truly leverage AI to go after those true outcomes. I think that's the thing that excites me most. But ultimately, it's either people's lack of will and interest to be able to innovate to that level, or perhaps their lack of ability to dream big enough to the size of the potential of what this thing can really drive for their business.
It seems like, to your point, Scott, both is a fascinating unlock for me. Is it seems like you got to have a vision for where you want your business to go and what you want it to be able to do when it's fully built, and how do we get there comes next. But to something you said, Scott, you went and you spoke to all of those board members, and all of them had different ideas of what that should look like, and they can all come together as a board and say, this is what we think, and let's all vote on it. But it also, they can do whatever they want. But if the customer won't accept it, or if the employees reject it, there has to be, I think, a step back even from the board of, let's survey our constituents and let's make sure that we're in alignment with them too. And also, to your point, going back to the visioning of like, this is where we want to go, come with us, right? Instead of just going, here's this new technology, right? And the other part is like, you have to take the risks and spend the money. I mean, I really applaud these companies that are onboarding Palantir and trying to, like, Heineken, Walgreens, Racetrack, the Wendy's QSEC is using it now. And I think that's the dream, is that there's this mega brain that can come in and take these systems and roll it up into one thing that gives you some sort of visibility, right? But that might not be the solution for everybody. That might be the solution for the US government, but does the restaurant have its version of Palantir, right? That we can start to work on that stuff now. And are you ready to take the risk? Let's go, right? What are your thoughts?
I mean, we call that building the organizational mind, right? That the restaurant, the bank, the law firm, whatever, everyone's going to build a synthetic layer of technology that, when orchestrated, creates an organizational mind, and not in a science fiction way. I mean, we're building prototypes of those now, right? Where it's a synthetic layer, multiple AI tools and agents that our employees interact with, and it is an organizational mind, right? And so we're clearly, that's where we're going to go, right? The question is just, what will your organizational mind look like? How much will it do? How will your people interface with it? I will. There was something I was going to say. You talked about market research, right? And that you got to test these things, like step back and test. I'll give you a real interesting use case to me. We have some clients in the hair salon space, like the biggest in the country. All right, those, and they are asking now, should we look at giving robotic haircuts? And I'm fascinated because technically, you can give a haircut to you and to me with a robotic, device. Now you can't my wife, right? But your haircut and my haircut for sure, right? And Carl's as well. But that's the interesting thing is, if I told you you can walk in, sit down under a robot, get the exact haircut that you want because you've decided and you've already, tested it. You're going to get the exact haircut you want over and over. It's $5. You walk right in and get it. You could do it every week or every 2 weeks. It's so simple and it's less expensive. All right. How much of our market would migrate to getting a haircut that way? Those are things that you have to have the courage to test, right? Or at least try to do some market research, because the initial reaction is, I've always had a human cut my hair. Why would I go in and sit under a robot? However, at the right price point, at the right quality, with no waiting, I think not only might a lot of guys, men do it, they might do it more frequently, right? I don't think women with long hair are going to do it anytime soon. But there are a lot of things like this that today seem crazy to us. I just don't think it'll be that crazy, 10 years from now.
Carl, you had a thought?
On the robo haircuts, no, I'm fascinated by it. I think it's true. I think that the world is rapidly changing in so many different ways. And for those of you that haven't been in a Waymo vehicle, the trials that are happening in Arizona and LA and some parts of Texas, I think are very exciting. Just the way in which that potentially is going to impact automation across the off-premise world. Obviously, I've commented a lot on that in recent years, and the delivery cost equation is a big reason why people are ordering less food delivery today. And so therefore, if you can do food delivery more efficiently and you can remove one of the higher component costs of food delivery through something like automated vehicles, then that could be massive, right? It could really change the way in which we think. Now, if that vehicle can also then collect your grocery orders and a bunch of other things, then we're going to end up having a situation where we have fulfillment centers collecting both your dinner, your groceries, and other items, maybe from the hardware store. But then you have the question, well, don't you still want to go out and go to the shopping center and hang out in those kind of environments? So I think that's the point around a lot of what you're hearing Scott talk about here is that there's always going to be a contingent of people that are going to want to have the human contact in all forms. But there are going to be others that are going to be able to get perhaps a more value enriched experience. Maybe it's for convenience, maybe it's because of cost, through other ways. And I think it's going to apply to every industry. And it's going to, yes, probably first rear its head through either innovative startups or those enterprises that get out of their own way to be able to unleash it.
Yeah, at some point, the human touch will come with a premium, right? You can get the low cost haircut. You can get the low cost ride. If you want somebody in your Uber because you don't trust the low cost ride or haircut, then you can spring for that, right?
Right. I mean, it was only 2008 when we started getting into strangers' cars.
Yeah, very true.
I remember that first Uber ride. I'm like, this is crazy. But yeah, now to your point, I see kind of what you're seeing. I imagine, years from now, driving home from the airport in a Waymo or a Tesla FSD or whatever, and it gives me a ping and it says, "Hey, can we swing by and pick up your neighbor's cup of coffee from Starbucks before we drop you off? Are you okay with that? Here's $1 back." Right? The possibilities are endless once the convergence of these technologies that seem to be there. Just it hasn't been brought together completely, right? And there's some regulatory hurdles, et cetera. But
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's so much excitement. It really is a case of just daring to dream in this space. I was talking to a retailer at dinner last night, and I was sharing with him the fact that we're going to get to a place where individuals have their own agent. And that agent is going to know everything about them, their preferences, what the things they like to eat, the things they don't like to eat, the things they like to buy. In this example, it was a furniture retailer. And I was saying, well, imagine a world where your agent knows everything about the current furniture, the current paint scheme, the color schemes inside your home. And maybe that you've been able to walk into a retail store where actually you give your agent the permission to then purview the store, and then you're going to go and sit down in an immersion center and be able to see how this furniture exists inside your house because your agent has provided that intel for that particular retailer to use for that particular experience. So versus the world today where you're finding people trying to sell things to you because they know that I'm of a certain age group or of a certain demographic, and maybe they're selling to me on Instagram and I click onto it from there. We're going to get to a place where the consumer is empowered to use their own agent to give them the experiences that they explicitly want. So I think there's an exciting future that potentially, yes, we'll need to go through a few regulatory hurdles, no doubt. But if we can get to that place, then the consumer experience is going to be incredible.
uh, thinking about the haircut, it reminds me, when you said, Scott, that there's women out there that might be open to that, but maybe that's the smart. I think of the risk, and if I'm in that hair salon business, going, the last thing I need is some woman's hair getting the wrong end of a something, and the PR nightmare. I think is a lens, right? Let's switch to that. Let's talk about risk and let's talk about moving smartly, moving safely. What should operators in food service, whether it's talking about technology, having the risk of somebody putting something into deep seek and it ending up affecting the stock price, or the risk of onboarding a technology and there being a PR problem. I can imagine what that would look like for some concepts to have a robot, in their lobby. But what other risks, or what would you suggest that operators take to heart in terms of how do we sift through these risks, these different multivaried sets of problems that will be created by artificial intelligence? What do you think, Scott?
We do a lot of work in the risk field. I hope people have learned lessons from cybersecurity risk because, we've had 12 to 15 years of dealing with the technology risk. Um, the first thing with AI risk is you have to know what your risks are. So, sure, you have the risk of an AI hallucinating. You have a risk of an AI getting bad training data and making mistakes. You have the risk of cyber criminals using AI tools against you. You have the risk of AI manipulation, where big tech or big organizations are manipulating your decisions with AI. Uh, there are a lot of AI risks, and so I think every leader needs to just say, "Hey, we have to have a mature AI risk management plan." It starts with knowing what risks do we have, and then it goes on to what are we going to do to mitigate the risks, right? How are we going to do that? And so we build plans where organizations have an inventory of their AI tools. They have, let's just say a restaurant has a spreadsheet. Here's all the internal AI tools, all the third-party tools. They list them. They list what they do. They list what the possible risks are. They have a simple 1 to 10 risk rating scale. And then they say, all right, well, if the risk is higher than 7, then we will audit and monitor these AI tools in a good, responsible way. So, we started a year or two ago working with the insurance space and law firms to build out these AI risk management plans. But they can be scaled to a small business of just understanding, look, there's 5 key risks. Just make sure you're doing something to defend yourself against these 5 key risks. If you're a large organization, it's more complex. You may have regulatory control, right, that you've got to be careful of. So that's, the best thing that I can say is there are a lot of risks. You've got to be mature about building a risk management system, just like we do with cybersecurity today.
Yeah, so it really is just a cybersecurity on steroids, taken to the next level. You should know what your stack looks like. You should know what your exposure points are. You should have good conversations and kind of employee hygiene with, obviously some of the stuff you see with don't enter your password into something, don't open emails. So some people we've kind of tooled a generation of people in how to combat that. But it seems like now we have this other layer of, okay, but you have your phone there and you could technically put something in your DeepSeek, and
Sure.
that's obviously hope not. But if I'm a CEO of a publicly traded restaurant company, that's something that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, it should. We've just started to run AI tabletop exercises. We've run them for cybersecurity for years, right? So we've done, cybersecurity wargaming, where you mock up an event and see how leaders take care of that. That's how we do incident response. We're now starting to do AI incident response. So running tabletops for the CEO, right, the C-suite, that's all about an AI failure, right, or an AI issue. And we run that scenario and see what they would do to deal with it. And a lot like running cyber scenarios 10 years ago that it just shocked them every time you ran one. That's how it is with AI today. It shocks leaders every time you run a scenario because they go, oh my God, I didn't even know that could happen. That would be devastating. We would get sued. Yes, you will.
Do you think that type of exercise causes them to think, okay, ounce of prevention, pound of cure? I mean, does that trigger that? Okay, now what do I got to do to get ahead of that? Is that the next question?
That's the goal, as opposed to triggering, oh, we hate AI, like we're scared of it, right? What you're trying to trigger is, hey, these things can happen. You got to have defenses, right? Or solutions. You don't want to stop using it. That's not the answer. Just like shutting down the internet is not an answer to your cybersecurity issues. Right? So, yes, it's making them think, all right, I now understand this is a risk. What proactive defenses do I need to have in place?
I think that the lens of what do I need to know that I don't know right now, and that probably needs to be a board level discussion. It needs to be lots of different, even in our industry, conversations like at Restaurant Leadership or Prosper or NRA. We have to be kind of talking about, what is that risk and how do we come together to come up with that best practice set, right? Carl, are you familiar? Is there any groups doing that type of thing currently that are kind of trying to bring our industry together on how we get ahead of that type of risk management conversation?
I think there are forums that come together. Certainly, there are groups that I speak to in the industry that don't necessarily form part of an official body, but I certainly speak to many. And a lot of organizations I know, Procter and Gamble, Wells Fargo, companies like that are developing centers of excellence to be able to really focus in on being able to ensure that they have not only the right AI policies that read like finance policies, thinking like, if you treat your AI logs like financial records, the fact that one day they might be discoverable, it helps them drive the right discipline to drive the right culture within their organization. And so I think if you are serious about taking on a very AI first future for your organization, consider the importance of actually having a center of excellence where you've got a group that are typically concentrating on identifying and implementing the business use cases for AI, developing the appropriate plans in place to ensure that risk management is appropriately being managed, but on the same end, accelerating the level of adoption, right, and assessing the impact of the initiatives that they're putting in place. So it's about managing all of those things together, but doing it in a cohesive fashion.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and I appreciate the time. And I thought we would turn to maybe some fun parts of this. Kind of a last question or a round of questions. Where do you guys see it going? Where do you think the next, whether it's humanoid robots or this roll up? What do you see? What are you excited about in terms of the next frontier?
I think two things for me. One is the ability to easily build that organizational mind and orchestrate many AI tools. Uh, I'm seeing the prototypes now, and they're blowing my mind. What they can do, what they will do. Then the second step of that is, let's say quantum computing comes along, and now you add huge amounts of power to those organizational minds. So I think those two steps I excited about seeing, and I think they will change humanity, change the economy quite a bit. Humanoid robots, I think we're going to have them for sure.
How long? What's your forecast? What do you think?
Oh, like any other technology adoption that's physical and it's expensive. I think you'll see, some people using them in their homes in the next couple of years, but very early adopters, and then, so I think it's a over the next 5 to 10 years thing. I just don't think they're going to be as big a deal, like when we hear Elon Musk talk about there's going to be 100 million, right? Every home's going to have two of them. I don't believe that. I think we'll have them. I think they'll be useful. I think there'll be a curve of who has them. But it isn't that I wouldn't invest money in a humanoid robot company. I was not a big believer in blockchain, right? And people kept asking me, "Oh, is blockchain going to change the world?" I kept saying, "No, it's not going to change the world. It's an interesting technology, right? But it isn't going to change the world." Humanoid robots, sure, they're going to change a fire department. They're going to change a construction company, okay? But yes, warehouse. But are they going to change the home massively? I don't think as much. And I think it's, again, people are getting swept up a little bit in the science fiction view of humanoid robots in the home.
I agree. I think it's probably not, we're not going to see them this decade en masse. The other question, of course, is humanoid, right? So is humanoid actually the best form for a robot to take? Ultimately, it depends on the type of tasks. There's a lot of folks now leaning into things like therapy when it comes to this. So I think that's a big part of this, which is going to be something which really determines what type of format we're talking about when it comes to robots.
Parting word, one last question. What's the one thing you'd leave with restaurant leaders today? What's the most important thing you think they should take away from this conversation today about artificial intelligence? Scott, what do you think?
This is a wave. This is a wave of opportunity. I think be bold and be entrepreneurial. So the one thing I would say, you don't get waves like this very often. So make a good decision, like strategically, make very good decisions, because I think that this wave could take people a long way, but it will swamp others who make poor decisions.
Yeah. I think ground up good decisions, but be bold.
Yeah, I think decision velocity is going to be a really important differentiator, right? How it's about faster decisions, better decisions, and so I think for me, when you think about your business today, when you think about how long it takes to reprice a menu, adjust labor forecast after a weather event, understanding the ways in which it's unlocking capabilities, or maybe by framing the question, if you had 100 extra people, where would you put them right now? Questions like that can unlock new ways of trying to rethink your business model. When we had the rise of off premise, what happened was there were new business models that emerged. And those new business models are now thriving because they were not held back by the ways in which things were once done. And so when you think about it through that lens, I think we've got a very exciting future ahead of ourselves, but it's going to require the right level of leadership that's going to be able to think that big, but then also be able to navigate that journey because this is something that's going to take time. The one thing I would recommend to everyone listening is get on that train because if you don't, you're going to get left behind very quickly.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Scott, Carl, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time and your insights. You guys are wise, and seeing the world through your view of it makes me a little more comfortable. And hey, real quick, Scott, how can people find you? What's the best way?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, I think under S. Klososky, but Future Point of View is the name of our firm. And so it's always easiest probably to get me at fpov.com.
Carl, same question.
Yeah, for me, obviously, LinkedIn's a great place to find. I have a strange surname, Orsbourn, ORSB. If you're interested in my books, check out the digital.restaurant. And if Invisible Technologies, invisible.co is the easiest way to find out more about us and what we're trying to do to help the world of AI and the transformation around it. But looking forward to spending more time with you guys at the Prosper event, and really appreciate the chance to have some time together to talk about this very important subject.
Yeah, looking forward to that too. To the listeners, thanks so much for staying with us. We appreciate you being a part of the Prosper Brief.